The piercing shriek of a jet engine, hot and raw, sliced through the stagnant desert air. The sound didn't just hit you. It vibrated through your bones, a constant reminder of the volatile world outside. Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma wiped a streak of grease from her brow with the back of a gloved hand, her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, scanning the flight line. This airbase, a colossal beast of metal and sand, sprawled across the desolate expanse of Qatar, pulsed with the frantic, organized chaos of a hornet's nest. Everything here moved with an urgency that left no room for questions, only answers. The scent of jet fuel hung heavy, a metallic tang that would cling to your clothes in memory for weeks. F-16s, sleek and deadly, sat like predatory birds on the scorching tarmac, their polished surfaces shimmering in the oppressive heat, while the distant rumble of transport planes echoed the relentless rhythm of military operations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Anya had been waiting for what felt like an eternity, 3 hours and counting, observing the intricate ballet of ground crews and flight engineers with the unhurried patience of someone who'd seen far worse delays in far more precarious places. The ache in her right shoulder, a dull throb where the titanium plate pressed against old shrapnel scars, was a familiar companion. She'd learned to operate around pain that couldn't be fixed, a silent agreement with her own body. Some people, she often mused, simply weren't wired for the sidelines. The message had come through the night before, a scrambled data burst on a frequency that, according to official logs, had been decommissioned years ago. Static crackled, punctuated by the voice of someone she'd personally mentored back when she was still a lead avionics specialist in the mountains of Afghanistan. "Lieutenant Commander," the voice had been raspy, strained. "It's Chief Petty Officer Davies, Liam Davies." She remembered him instantly. A sharp-witted kid from Florida. Quick hands, quicker mind. Always asking the questions other technicians were too intimidated to voice. "What's your status, Liam?" Anya had asked, her voice calm, cutting through the digital noise. "Not good, ma'am. Took a hit during the last patrol. Our birds are grounded. Something with the navigation systems and the weapons integration. Doctors here are talking about system-wide failures. Things I don't understand. I need someone who knows what they're doing." Anya had already been reaching for her gear, the familiar weight of her toolkit a comfort in her hands, before he'd finished. "Are you asking for me specifically, Liam?" "Yes, ma'am, if that's possible. I know it's not through official channels, and I know you're not active anymore, but—" "Liam?" Anya had interrupted, her tone firm, resolute. "I'll be there. No transfer requests, no formal approvals, no bureaucratic red tape. Just a promise made in the digital dark to a chief petty officer who needed someone who still gave a damn." Now, she sat on a sun-baked fuel barrel near the main hangar, the metal hot enough to sear skin, watching a transport plane, her ride, prepare for departure. Two stern-faced military police officers, their new-issue body armor, pristine, stood guard like sentinels protecting the crown jewels, not just a routine parts delivery. Behind them, an aging C-130 Hercules, its engines already whining to life, slowly built to the thunderous roar that would soon tear through the desert air. Anya approached the MPs with the quiet confidence that came from 2 decades of being precisely where she needed to be, when she needed to be there. "Afternoon, Lieutenant Commander Sharma. Hoping to catch a seat north on the logistics run. I know I'm not on the manifest, but—" The first guard, a young airman barely out of basic training, didn't even bother to look up from his digital clipboard. "Manifest full. No walk-ons today, ma'am." Anya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I understand that, but this is somewhat urgent. Someone specifically requested." The second guard, older, with the weary cynicism of someone who'd seen too many urgent requests, cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Orders are orders, ma'am. Bird's full. Next rotation's tomorrow, maybe." Anya took the rejection the way she took most things, quietly, without argument. She nodded once, a brief acknowledgement of their unwavering adherence to protocol, and retreated to her spot on the fuel drum. She found a sliver of shade where she could observe the organized chaos without becoming an obstruction. Behind her, 2 fresh-faced flight lieutenants, their uniforms so crisp they practically rustled, were engaged in the kind of conversation young officers have when they believe they fully grasp the complexities of the military world. "Look at her," one of them chuckled, his voice carrying just enough to be heard over the rising engine whine. "She probably hasn't been outside a logistics office in her life," his buddy snorted in agreement. "Probably some desk jockey trying to hitch a ride for the adventure. They all walk like that, like they've got a stick up their ass." Anya heard every word. Her grip on her duffel strap tightened, just a fraction, but her expression remained perfectly neutral. Decades of service had taught her that reactions are choices, and some choices simply aren't worth making. The guards, seemingly appeased by the lieutenant's clean uniforms and confident swagger, waved them through without a second glance. Their perceived importance was apparently all the credentials they needed. Meanwhile, Anya sat in the relentless heat, watching a transport plane, a lifeline to a desperate situation, prepare to leave without her. What they didn't know was why she was truly there. What they couldn't see was the small, barely visible patch on the inside of her plain, unassuming mechanic's jacket. Charcoal gray, almost blending into the fabric, unless you knew precisely what to look for. A stylized falcon, its wings outstretched, a single wrench clutched in its talons. No text, no unit designation, nothing that would ever appear in any official database. But if you understood its meaning, it meant everything. The morning had started differently, in a Spartan barracks room that smelled of industrial solvent and stale coffee. Anya had packed with the same methodical precision she'd perfected over 2 decades. Every item in its designated place, every cubic inch of space utilized with ruthless efficiency. Her personal diagnostic kit, a custom-built array of specialized tools and encrypted data drives, went in first. Not because the standard-issue equipment wasn't good enough, but because when a squadron's survival was measured in minutes, you used what you knew worked, what you had built with your own hands. The titanium plate that reinforced her right collarbone, a constant reminder of the shrapnel that had torn through her flight suit over Mosul 5 years ago, was now an integral part of her morning routine. It was as automatic as checking the torque on a primary actuator. The injury had left her with a choice: accept the limitations or find a way around them. Anya Sharma had never been good at accepting limitations. From her duffel she'd pulled out a coin, worn smooth with age, silver gleaming faintly. On one side, the same falcon with the wrench etched into its surface. No words, no unit designation, nothing that would mean anything to someone who hadn't earned the right to comprehend it. She'd slipped it into her boot, the way others carried a lucky penny. Except this particular piece of metal represented something most people weren't supposed to know existed. Sky Warden wasn't a person. It was a protocol. A program that officially never happened, run by people who officially were never there, handling situations that officially never needed handling. Technical support for operations so classified that the pilots conducting them couldn't even tell their therapists about the nightmares afterward. Anya had been part of that world once, had carried that patch with a mix of pride and dread, had walked into hangars where multi-million-dollar aircraft were crippled, and their own flight engineers couldn't fix them, either because of the obscure nature of the damage, or the simple fact that officially, those aircraft weren't supposed to be there in the first place. But that was before the injury, before the program got quietly shut down, before she became just another retired lieutenant commander, trying to figure out how to be useful in a world that didn't seem to need her unique blend of skills. Except sometimes, late at night, on encrypted channels, it still did. Now, as she watched the C-130's propellers begin their slow, powerful rotation, Anya shrugged off her windbreaker, ostensibly to deal with the oppressive heat. But in reality, she was tired of being invisible. The patch on her sleeve caught the harsh desert sunlight for a fleeting moment, just long enough for someone who knew what to look for to see it. One of the aircraft's crew chiefs, a grizzled master sergeant with grease permanently etched under his fingernails and the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too many combat deployments, caught a glimpse as he walked past. He stopped mid-stride, blinked, and looked again. For a brief instant, his carefully maintained military bearing faltered, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like awe. But he said nothing, just continued with his pre-flight checks, though Anya noticed he kept glancing back at her, with the kind of deference usually reserved for decorated combat veterans and chief master sergeants who could disassemble a jet engine with their bare hands. The earlier rejection by the MPs stung, but Anya had learned long ago that pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when someone like Liam Davies was stuck in a remote outpost with a crippled squadron of F-16s and fear in his eyes. So she waited. Sometimes, that was all you could do. Colonel Marcus Thorne strode out of the command tent like he owned the very air of the desert. You could feel the shift in the atmosphere before you even saw him. Conversations hushed, postures straightened, and the general hum of military logistics suddenly acquired a focused precision that only came when someone with true authority entered the picture. Thorne was the kind of colonel who'd earned his rank in places where miscalculations got pilots killed, and it showed in every aspect of his presence, from his measured, purposeful stride to the way his eyes instinctively cataloged threats and assets in whatever space he entered. Late 50s, built like someone who still started his day with a punishing workout, he possessed a command presence that didn't need to be loud to be heard. He emerged from the tent, a steel thermos in one hand, already deep in conversation with his executive officer about squadron readiness and deployment timelines. Anya watched him from her perch on the fuel drum, noting the unconscious deference of other personnel who subtly shifted to give him space, the almost tangible aura of command that followed him like a shadow. The new avionics teams from Region 7 will need immediate clearance before we can authorize their flight ops, his executive officer, a crisp, meticulous major, was saying, consulting a tablet while trying to keep pace with Thorne's longer stride. Thorne was nodding absently, but Anya could tell he wasn't truly listening anymore. His attention had shifted, locked onto something that had caught his highly trained eye. He'd seen her patch. He stopped walking so abruptly that his executive officer nearly bumped into him. "Sir?" the major asked, following his commander's unblinking gaze toward where Anya sat in the meager shade of the fuel drum. Thorne didn't answer immediately. He was studying Anya with the focused intensity of someone piecing together a complex puzzle. The way she sat, perfectly still, yet completely aware. The way her eyes continuously scanned her surroundings. The careful economy of movement that spoke of training far beyond standard military protocols. And then he saw it clearly, just a fleeting glimpse as her jacket shifted in the breeze. The patch that shouldn't exist, on the uniform of someone who, officially, had never been there. "God help us," he muttered under his breath, but he was already moving, changing direction with decisive authority. Each step toward Anya was measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of understanding what that patch truly represented. Anya saw him coming and straightened slightly, not out of nervousness, but from the ingrained respect one professional gives another. She didn't speak, just waited with the patience of someone accustomed to letting situations unfold before committing to a course of action. Thorne stopped precisely 6 feet away, close enough for a private conversation, but far enough to maintain proper military bearing. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of shared experience and hard-earned knowledge. "Sky Warden." 2 words, quiet enough that only she could hear them, but clear enough to cut through 2 decades of officially sanctioned silence. For the first time since she'd arrived at the airbase, Anya Sharma allowed herself a faint smile. Not a wide, effusive grin, but the small, almost imperceptible expression of recognition that passes between people who have navigated the same shadows. She said simply, her voice low. "A long time ago, sir." Thorne's expression shifted, the professional mask giving way to something that looked suspiciously like relief mixed with profound respect. "You're not on the manifest." "No, sir." "Why not?" "Didn't ask to be. Just trying to get north. Someone needs help." That was enough. Thorne turned on his heel and marched directly toward the MPs guarding the transport, his expression leaving no doubt that someone's day was about to become exquisitely complicated. Anya couldn't hear what he said to the young airman, but the effect was immediate and dramatic. The first guard's eyes went wide. He began flipping through his clipboard with sudden, frantic urgency, erasing and rewriting names with the panicked energy of someone whose comfortable assumptions had just been shattered. The second guard, the one who'd been so dismissive earlier, was now standing at rigid attention, his earlier swagger replaced by the kind of nervous energy that comes from realizing you've just been profoundly wrong about something important. Within minutes, one of the originally scheduled passengers, a supply sergeant heading north for routine inventory, was politely informed that his seat had been reassigned due to operational priority override. The man started to protest, took one look at Thorne's granite expression, and decided that discretion was, indeed, the better part of valor. The grizzled crew chief, who had glimpsed Anya's patch earlier, jogged over to where she sat, his earlier glances now making perfect sense. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the respectful tone reserved for individuals who'd earned it the hard way. "You're with us." Anya stood, shouldered her duffel with practiced ease, and began walking toward the waiting C-130. As she approached the loading ramp, she passed the two flight lieutenants who'd been making jokes about her earlier. Their confident banter had evaporated, replaced by the kind of bewildered silence that comes from watching your carefully constructed assumptions crumble in real time. One of them leaned toward his buddy, his voice barely audible over the roaring engines. "Who the hell is she?" The other shook his head slowly, still staring. "I have no idea, but did you see how fast the colonel moved her onto that bird?" Anya reached the ramp where Colonel Thorne was waiting. When she stopped in front of him, he did something that surprised everyone watching. He saluted. Not the casual nod officers usually gave to enlisted personnel, but the deep, respectful salute reserved for those who had earned it in places where earning it might cost you everything. Anya hesitated for just a moment, then returned the salute with crisp, flawless precision. Then she climbed the ramp and disappeared into the dim, utilitarian interior of the C-130. Thorne watched her vanish into the belly of the transport as its engine spun up to full power. When his executive officer finally worked up the courage to ask the obvious question, the colonel's answer was characteristically understated. "Sir, should I log this under tactical priority or administrative override?" Thorne didn't look away from the aircraft as it began its ponderous liftoff, its massive propellers beating the desert air into submission. "Log it under necessity," he said simply. "Sometimes, the right person needs to be in the right place, regardless of what the paperwork says." Inside the roaring belly of the C-130, the familiar sensations of pre-flight settled around Anya like an old, comfortable flight suit. The metallic vibration through the deck plating, the hydraulic hiss of systems coming online, the peculiar pressure that built in your ears just before the massive aircraft lumbered into the sky. She'd been in more military transports than she could count, in more theaters of operation than most people could even pronounce. The routine was as comforting as it was functional, a choreography of controlled power. She stowed her duffel beneath her seat with automatic efficiency, then settled into the webbing harness that would secure her during what was undoubtedly going to be a rough flight through turbulent airspace. Her eyes automatically scanned the interior. Emergency exits first, then aid equipment, anything that might be useful if things went sideways, which, in her line of work, was often a matter of when rather than if. Across from her, a young avionics technician, maybe half her age, was trying desperately not to stare at the falcon patch visible through her partly unzipped jacket. He'd probably heard the stories about Sky Warden, the kind of whispered legends that circulated through military technical corps like ghost stories around a campfire. Tales of specialists who went places regular mechanics couldn't go, who fixed things regular engineers couldn't touch, who operated under protocols that officially didn't exist. He didn't ask questions. Smart kid. The seat next to Anya remained conspicuously empty. Not because there wasn't anyone else who could sit there, but because word had already spread through the small passenger compartment about who she was, or at least who she might be. In the military, sometimes reputation traveled faster than facts, and sometimes that was enough. Near the cockpit, a radio operator leaned toward the young tech who'd been staring. "That patch on her sleeve," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the drone of the engines. "You know what that is?" The tech shook his head, a hint of awe in his eyes. "Sky Warden. Special technical protocol. They handled situations too sensitive for regular channels. I thought that was just stories." "Maybe it was," the radio operator said, glancing toward Anya with something akin to reverence. "But she's wearing the patch." Anya closed her eyes and let the familiar rhythm of the propeller wash settle into her bones, the deep thrumming vibration a lullaby of impending action. She wasn't thinking about patches or protocols or the curious stares of young airmen who'd never seen anything like her. She was thinking about a young Chief Petty Officer named Liam Davies, stranded in a remote outpost with a squadron of F-16s that were little more than expensive paperweights, and a rising tide of fear in his eyes. The pilot's voice crackled through the internal communications system. All passengers secure, lifting in 30 seconds. As the C-130 rose into the scorching desert sky, Anya felt a familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Some promises were worth keeping, regardless of what the official channels said or what the paperwork allowed. Some things mattered more than protocol, and sometimes, being exactly where you needed to be was the only thing that mattered at all. The flight north took 2 hours, through air that felt like flying through a blast furnace. Anya kept her eyes closed for most of it, not from fear or fatigue, but from the kind of focused mental preparation that came from years of walking into situations where being ready meant the difference between successful mission accomplishment and catastrophic failure. The encrypted call from Liam Davies played on repeat in her mind. She'd trained hundreds of technicians over the years, but some voices stick with you. The ones that carried both desperate hope and professional terror in equal measure. The ones that reminded you why you donned the uniform in the first place. Liam had been different from the start. While other students focused on memorizing procedural manuals, he'd ask the questions that truly mattered. What do you do when the textbook doesn't cover what you're seeing? How do you make decisions when there's no time to think? How do you keep going when everything inside you wants to quit? Anya had seen that hunger before, in soldiers who understood that technical expertise wasn't just about knowledge. It was about caring enough to do whatever it took to bring people and their multi-million-dollar assets home. She'd pulled him aside after one particularly brutal training exercise, when he'd refused to give up on a simulated avionics failure that 3 other teams had written off as hopeless. "Why didn't you stop?" she'd asked him. Liam had looked at her with the kind of absolute clarity that comes from unwavering conviction. "Because someone's pilots are waiting for their birds to fly, ma'am, and I don't want to be the reason they wait forever." That's when Anya had known he was going to be something special, not because he was the smartest or the fastest or the most technically skilled, but because he understood that being a specialist meant carrying the lives and missions of others in your hands, and that weight was a privilege, not a burden. Now he was the one who needed help, and Anya was damned if she was going to let bureaucracy stand in the way of keeping her promise. The C-130 began its descent toward Forward Operating Base Kestrel, a cluster of hardened aircraft shelters and makeshift repair tents surrounded by defensive barriers that had been built and rebuilt so many times they looked like archaeological layers. Anya opened her eyes and watched the base grow larger through the small window, her mind already cataloging the familiar organized chaos of a flight line operating at maximum capacity. The young tech across from her was still stealing glances at her patch, clearly working up the courage to ask the question that was burning in his mind. Anya decided to save him the trouble. "What's your name, son?" He straightened slightly, surprised to be addressed directly. "Airman First Class Rodriguez, ma'am. Been out here about 6 months. What do you know about field maintenance on F-16 avionics?" Rodriguez's answer came with the rehearsed precision of someone who'd studied hard, but hadn't been tested yet. "Standard protocols, ma'am. Troubleshoot. Replace faulty components. Recertify for flight." And when standard protocols aren't enough, the question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that Rodriguez was just beginning to understand. Anya had asked the same question to hundreds of students over the years, and the answer always revealed who was going to make it and who wasn't. You adapt, ma'am." Anya almost smiled. "You improvise. You use what you have to do, what needs to be done. You remember that your job isn't to follow the rules. It's to keep aircraft in the air and pilots safe. Sometimes those two things are the same. Sometimes they're not." The C-130 touched down with a jarring thump that rattled everyone's teeth, a harsh reminder of the unforgiving desert landing strip. As the massive engines wound down, Anya stood and slung her duffel over her shoulder with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd performed this particular dance countless times. The crew chief appeared at her elbow as she moved toward the exit ramp. "Ma'am, they're expecting you at the main hangar. Someone named Davies specifically asked for you." Anya nodded once, a brief acknowledgement, and stepped off the aircraft into heat that hit her like a physical blow, thick and stifling, instantly coating her skin in a fine sheen of sweat. The air shimmered above the tarmac, distorting the outlines of the distant hangars. The rhythmic clang of tools, the distant roar of a generator, and the clipped voices of ground crew blended into a chaotic symphony that Anya found oddly comforting. This was her element. The base was smaller than the bustling Camp Verdun, but it buzzed with an even more urgent energy, the concentrated intensity of a place where operational readiness hung in the balance every minute of every day. Mechanics moved between aircraft with quick efficiency, their movements carrying the focused intensity of professionals who understood that time was always the enemy when a squadron was grounded. She navigated the maze of ground equipment and service vehicles, her eyes constantly scanning, already assessing the overall state of the flight line. Was there a noticeable disarray, a subtle tension in the way the crews moved? Little details that spoke volumes to someone who could read a hangar like an open book. She found Chief Petty Officer Liam Davies exactly where she'd expected to, in the makeshift repair tent adjacent to the main flight line, hunched over a complex diagnostic console, his face illuminated by the flickering green glow of an F-16s system's schematics. His uniform was stained with hydraulic fluid and dust, and his face had the grayish pallor that came from exhaustion, frustration, and the crushing pressure of trying to fix something beyond his current capabilities. Empty coffee cups and crumpled energy bar wrappers littered his small workspace, testament to the long hours he'd already put in. When he saw her approaching, his eyes widened, as if he wasn't sure she was real, a mirage shimmering in the oppressive heat. He pushed himself away from the console, almost tripping over a loose cable. "Ma'am!" His voice cracked with a mixture of relief and disbelief, a raw, almost childlike sound that betrayed the immense strain he was under. Anya knelt beside him without ceremony, her attention already focused on the glowing screen, her hand instinctively reaching for the data logs and diagnostic readouts. She began checking the system errors with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done this assessment more times than she could count. The error codes were a chaotic mess, a tangled web of sensor failures, navigation glitches, and inexplicable weapons system lockouts. It wasn't just a single system, it was a cascade, like dominoes falling across the aircraft's intricate electronic brain. Whoever had tried to fix it initially had done good work under impossible circumstances, a valiant attempt to patch over systemic failures, but it wasn't going to be enough. Liam's notes, scrawled furiously on a notepad, confirmed her initial suspicion. They were dealing with something far more insidious than a simple component failure. "I didn't think you'd actually come," Liam whispered, his voice small, younger than his years, barely audible above the hum of the tent's portable air conditioning unit. Anya looked him directly in the eye, her gaze steady, cutting through the fog of his fear and uncertainty. "We don't leave our own behind, Chief," she said simply, her voice carrying the quiet authority that instantly instilled calm. "Now, give me the rundown, clear and concise. What exactly happened?" From behind her, one of the station's senior technicians, a master sergeant with weary eyes and a perpetually worried frown etched into his brow, approached hesitantly. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, the burden of the grounded squadron weighing heavily on him. "Ma'am, I don't think we've been introduced. I'm Master Sergeant Jenkins, and I've been overseeing the attempts to get these birds back in the air." He gestured vaguely towards the 4 F-16s parked just outside the tent, their noses pointed expectantly towards the sky, yet stubbornly immobile. Anya didn't look up from her intense examination of the diagnostic screen, her fingers flying across a portable keypad she'd pulled from her kit, cross-referencing data points with astonishing speed. "I need full system schematics for all F-16C Block 50s assigned to this base, real-time sensor data from the last 3 flight attempts, and someone to tell me exactly what kind of electronic warfare countermeasures were active during the last patrol that grounded them." Her voice was calm, almost detached, but left no room for debate. Jenkins blinked, clearly not used to being interrupted or given orders by someone he didn't recognize, let alone someone who looked like she'd spent the last 3 years in a library. He puffed out his chest slightly, a reflex born of years of being the most senior NCO on the ground. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but I need to see some credentials before I can grant access to that kind of classified data. This is highly sensitive information, and you're not on any authorized personnel list for this base, nor is there any record of your deployment here." He glanced pointedly at her plain, unadorned uniform jacket, a silent judgment in his eyes. Anya finally looked up, her stormy eyes locking onto his. The polite deference vanished, replaced by an intensity that made Jenkins involuntarily take a small step back. "Sergeant," she said quietly, her voice low but laced with steel. "Those F-16s have been grounded for 18 hours while you people figure out paperwork. You can check my credentials later. Right now, you can either help me get those birds in the air, or you can explain to Colonel Thorne why you let bureaucracy get in the way of operational readiness. When a dozen multi-million-dollar assets and the lives of American pilots are on the line." She didn't raise her voice, but every word resonated with an authority that was impossible to ignore. Jenkins looked at Liam, who was nodding vigorously, then back at Anya, then at the frustratingly unreadable diagnostic screens that were clearly beyond his ability to handle properly. The weight of his own failures, and the consequences of the grounded squadron, seemed to press down on him. The air in the tent thickened with the unspoken pressure. Finally, he sagged slightly, the fight draining from him. "What do you need, ma'am?" he asked, his voice subdued. "Anything. Just tell me." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For the next 4 hours, Anya worked with a focused intensity that bordered on preternatural, a silent symphony of precision that had made her legendary among the clandestine Skywarden personnel. She plunged into the digital labyrinth of the F-16 systems, dissecting error logs with surgical exactitude, cross-referencing sensor data from multiple aircraft, and meticulously tracing the path of corrupted signals that had crippled the entire squadron. Each line of code, each flicker of data, was a clue in a puzzle only she seemed capable of solving. She didn't talk much while she worked, just the occasional quiet, almost whispered instruction to the stunned technicians who'd gathered to watch and learn. Her hands, nimble and sure, danced across the custom keyboard she'd pulled from her kit, entering complex commands that bypassed corrupted modules and rerouted critical data streams. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, drawing on 2 decades of intimate knowledge of these machines, from their earliest prototypes to their most recent combat upgrades. She identified a subtle, almost imperceptible frequency bleed-off in the primary navigation array, a ghost signal that was jamming the weapons integration system and scrambling the data link to the ground. It was an anomaly so obscure, so deeply buried in the F-16's intricate architecture, that only someone who had literally helped design and test these very systems would recognize it. "It's a feedback loop," she murmured, more to herself than to the captivated audience. "A resonance interference from the updated ECM suites. They're broadcasting on a harmonics collision frequency with the nav link. It's subtle, but it's enough to blind the targeting systems and corrupt the flight data." Liam Davies, still pale from exhaustion but now buzzing with renewed hope, scrambled to implement her commands, his fingers flying across his own console. Master Sergeant Jenkins, initially skeptical, watched with wide eyes as Anya bypassed multiple system safeties and dove into the F-16's core programming. He had never seen anyone work with such audacious confidence or with such a profound, almost intuitive understanding of the aircraft. She's reprogramming the flight control module from the ground?" he whispered, disbelief lacing his voice. Another technician, a seasoned veteran with a decade of F-16 maintenance under his belt, simply shook his head in silent awe. "Not just reprogramming, Sarge. She's rewriting its damn DNA." Gradually, the chaotic red lines on the diagnostic screens began to turn green, then a solid, reassuring blue. The frantic warnings resolved into clear, functional data. The dull thrum of the inert F-16 outside seemed to shift, a subtle change in its dormant state, almost as if it were breathing again. When Anya finally leaned back and pulled off her gloves, the F-16's onboard systems were purring with newly restored life, a complex network of thousands of components now operating in perfect harmony. "She'll fly," Anya said simply, devoid of triumph, merely stating a fact. She didn't pause for congratulations, already turning her attention to the next grounded aircraft in the row, a twin to the first, afflicted with a similar, yet subtly different, set of symptoms. "All right, Liam, let's get to the next one. We've got a squadron to get airborne." Liam Davies was staring at her, a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a profound sense of relief washing over his face. The crushing weight of responsibility that had borne down on him for the past 18 hours had lifted, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He couldn't help but feel a profound admiration for this woman who had simply appeared out of nowhere to solve a problem that had stumped everyone. Not the restless unconsciousness of shock and pain, but the deep, almost reverent silence of someone whose squadron was finally safe. Anya stood slowly, working the kinks out of her back, and found herself surrounded by a small crowd of technical personnel who'd been drawn by word that someone with Sky Warden credentials was working on the tough cases they'd been struggling with all morning. "How did you know how to fix that, ma'am?" one of them began, his voice hushed, almost a whisper. "Experience," Anya said simply, her eyes fixed on the next F-16, already mentally dissecting its problems, and caring more about the mission than the procedure. Just then, the distinctive roar of a command jet approaching cut through the afternoon air. This one was larger, heavier, with the unmistakable sound signature of a VIP transport rather than a simple logistics flight. The sound reverberated through the very ground, shaking the corrugated metal of the repair tent. Anya didn't need to look to know that someone important was arriving. The way the camp personnel suddenly became busier, their movements sharper, the way conversations got quieter, hushed to mere murmurs, the subtle shift in atmosphere that always preceded the arrival of serious authority. She also didn't need to look to know that her time here, in this brief, vital window of unofficial operation, was rapidly running out. She'd done what she came to do, and now the official channels would inevitably take over, with their proper procedures and documented protocols and carefully maintained separation between what was officially acknowledged and what had actually happened. But 12 F-16s were going to fly again, their complex systems humming with renewed life, their pilots ready to execute critical missions. And sometimes, that's all that mattered. Colonel Marcus Thorne stepped off the command jet with the same measured authority he displayed back at the sprawling airbase in Qatar, but this time his attention was focused entirely on finding Anya. The word had already spread through the small, high-tension base about the mysterious woman who'd appeared out of nowhere and performed what the technical staff were already calling a minor miracle on the squadron of F-16s everyone else had given up on. He spotted her near the repair tents, wiping hydraulic fluid from her hands at a makeshift field sink, with the methodical thoroughness of someone who'd performed this particular ritual countless times. She looked up when she sensed his approach, her movements economical and precise, betraying not an ounce of surprise. For a moment, they simply studied each other with the mutual respect of professionals who understood exactly what they were both witnessing, the raw, undeniable impact of an unsanctioned operation. "How are they?" Thorne asked, his voice low, glancing towards the now active F-16s, their engines cycling, ready for test flights. The distinctive whine of their systems was already a stark contrast to the earlier silence. "They'll fly," Anya said simply, drying her hands on a worn rag. "They just needed someone with experience in deep-level avionics to put the pieces back together." "And you just happened to be available," Thorne responded, a hint of a wry smile playing on his lips. Anya almost smiled back. "I'm always available for my people, Colonel. That's what the patch means." Thorne was quiet for a moment, watching the organized chaos of the flight line continue around them. Ground crews, invigorated by the sudden shift from despair to readiness, moved with renewed purpose. "I thought Sky Warden was disbanded, officially," Thorne stated, his gaze meeting hers. "But caring about pilots who need their birds in the air isn't something you can disband with paperwork, Colonel. It's something you carry with you." The Colonel's expression shifted, becoming more guarded, a subtle tightening around his eyes. "Do you know what kind of position this puts me in? Having someone with your background operating in my area of responsibility without proper authorization, without any authorization." Anya met his gaze directly, unflinching. "What kind of position does it put you in to have a dozen F-16s grounded indefinitely, Colonel? What kind of position does it put you in to potentially lose a squadron because proper authorization took too long?" It was a fair question, and Thorne knew it. In the military, there were rules and procedures for everything. But sometimes, those rules and procedures ran up against the simple reality that operational readiness and the lives of those who depended on it hung in the balance. Good commanders learn to navigate that tension. Great commanders learned when to ignore it entirely. "The paperwork is going to be interesting," Thorn said finally, a sigh escaping him. "What paperwork?" Anya asked, her face a mask of practiced innocence. "I was never here." Behind them, Master Sergeant Jenkins approached, his earlier skepticism replaced by a profound, almost nervous respect. He looked like he'd just witnessed an alien craftland. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for what you did for the squadron. I've been trying to troubleshoot those systems for hours, but I just didn't have the experience to—" "You did fine, Sergeant," Anya interrupted, her voice gentle, cutting him off before he could fully articulate his humility. "The initial work was solid. Sometimes it just takes a different perspective to see what needs to be done. And sometimes you just need a better set of tools." Jenkins looked like he wanted to ask more questions, 1,000 unvoiced queries burning in his eyes, but something in Anya's expression suggested that the conversation was over. He nodded once, a gesture of deep respect, and returned to his duties, leaving Anya and Thorn alone again. "There's going to be an investigation," Thorn said quietly, his voice a low rumble. "Questions about how you got here, who authorized your presence, why you were allowed to touch a combat aircraft without proper credentials." Anya shouldered her duffel bag and checked her watch. "Then I'd better not be here when it starts." "Anya." Thorn's use of her first name carried weight, the kind of informal address that acknowledged they were speaking as professionals, as fellow soldiers, rather than as representatives of their respective positions in the chain of command. "What you did today, it matters, but it also raises questions that neither of us wants to answer." "Some questions are worth raising, Colonel," Anya said, her gaze sweeping across the now vibrant flight line. "Especially when the alternative is letting good pilots fly crippled birds. Or worse, losing an entire squadron because we're too worried about covering our asses to do the right thing." Thorn nodded slowly. He'd been in command long enough to understand that sometimes the right thing and the authorized thing weren't the same thing, and that good leaders had to be willing to accept responsibility for the choices they made in those moments. "How do you want to handle this?" he asked, a subtle challenge in his voice. "Handle what?" Anya countered, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. "Far as I can tell, one of your senior technicians got creative with a difficult case and managed to get a dozen F-16s back in the air. Happens all the time. And if someone asks about the woman who appeared out of nowhere—" "What woman?" Anya asked, her tone dry as the desert air. "I think the heat might be getting to you, Colonel." Thorn almost smiled. A genuine, unburdened expression. "You know, for someone who officially doesn't exist, you have a remarkable ability to make problems disappear." "Problems?" Anya slung her duffel bag over her shoulder and began walking toward the waiting C-130 on the pad, where her ride back south was already spinning up for departure. "I don't see any problems here. I see a dozen F-16s that are ready to fly and complete their mission. I see technical personnel who learned something new today about advanced avionics. I see a commanding officer who made the right call when it mattered." She paused at the edge of the landing zone, the powerful rotor wash from the C-130 whipping her hair around her face. "Sometimes, Colonel, the most important work happens in the spaces between the official reports. Sometimes the best way to handle a problem is to make sure it never becomes a problem in the first place." Thorn watched her walk toward the aircraft, her figure becoming smaller and less distinct as she moved into the swirling dust and heat distortion of the desert afternoon. By the time the C-130 lifted off, carrying her back toward the official world and whatever came next, he was already beginning to convince himself that maybe the whole thing had been some kind of heat-induced hallucination. After all, Sky Warden had been disbanded years ago. Everyone knew that. And mysterious women with classified patches and extraordinary technical skills didn't just appear out of nowhere to save squadrons before disappearing again without a trace. Things like that only happened in stories. As Colonel Thorn walked back toward the command tent, the subtle hum of the newly activated F-16s was a constant, almost mocking reminder of the impossible task that had just been accomplished. The air crackled with a renewed energy, a palpable shift from the earlier tension of grounded warbirds. He caught sight of Master Sergeant Jenkins, meticulously documenting the recent maintenance actions in the official flight logs. The young Chief Petty Officer Davies was there too, assisting Jenkins, both moving with a renewed purpose and an almost frantic attention to detail. Jenkins was being extraordinarily thorough, noting every diagnostic step that had been performed, every component that had been checked, every system test that had been run. His pen scratched across the paper, filling lines with official jargon, but his eyes, when he occasionally glanced up at the F-16s being towed for final pre-flight checks, held a mixture of wonder and bewilderment. What he wasn't noting, conspicuously, was who had actually performed those critical procedures, who had rewritten the F-16's internal code, or who had walked in and flipped the switch on a problem deemed unsolvable. Smart kids, Thorne thought, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. Some things were simply better left off the official record, relegated to the realm of whispered legends and unspoken acknowledgments. Inside the repair tent, the atmosphere was one of quiet, almost reverent relief. The hum of the F-16s outside was no longer a distant lament, but a powerful thrum of readiness, a symphony of millions of dollars of precision machinery awakening. Liam Davies, though clearly still pale from exhaustion but now buzzing with renewed purpose and almost giddy energy, he watched as his squadron, moments before crippled, now cycled through their pre-flight checks, their navigation lights blinking like expectant eyes, their targeting systems acquiring imaginary targets. He'd seen the impossible achieved. He would remember every single precise command Anya had issued, every intricate wiring connection she'd traced. And when he recovered enough from the ordeal to think clearly, he would understand that Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma had kept her promise in the most profound way possible. She'd shown up when he needed her most, a silent guardian of operational integrity, regardless of what the official channels said or what the paperwork allowed. She'd risked her own position, her carefully constructed civilian life, and her reputation to honor a commitment that existed outside the normal boundaries of military protocol. And then, she disappeared again, a ghost in the machine, leaving behind only the indelible memory of steady hands, quiet competence, and the absolute certainty that some promises are worth keeping, no matter what the personal cost. The ride back to Camp Verdun passed in a state of deep, contemplative silence for Anya. She sat in the same web seat she'd occupied on the flight north, but now, the familiar weight of what she'd accomplished was settling on her shoulders like a well-worn burden, a comfortable ache that resonated deep in her bones. The young airman First Class Rodriguez was also on the return flight, and this time, when he looked at her, it was with the kind of profound understanding that comes from witnessing something truly extraordinary, something that shattered the rigid boundaries of expectation. He no longer stared with mere curiosity, but with a gaze that held nascent respect and a thirst for knowledge. "Ma'am," he said, his voice hushed, almost reverent as they flew through the oppressive desert heat, the sun now a fiery orb sinking below the horizon. "What you did back there? Is that what Sky Warden really was?" Anya looked out the window at the endless expanse of sand and rock passing beneath them, broken only by the occasional, stark reminder that people lived and worked, and sometimes died, in places most of the world would never see. The vastness of the landscape mirrored the vastness of the unofficial world she inhabited. "Sky Warden was whatever it needed to be," she said quietly, her voice just above the drone of the engines. "Sometimes that meant going places other people couldn't go. Sometimes it meant doing things other people couldn't do. But mostly it meant showing up when someone needed you to show up. It meant bridging the gap between what is and what should be." Rodriguez thought about that for a while, watching the desert scroll past beneath them, the rapidly cooling air creating shimmering mirages on the horizon. "Do you miss it? The work?" Anya was quiet for so long that he thought she wasn't going to answer, perhaps lost in a memory of a distant mission, a critical decision made under impossible pressure. But finally she turned from the window and looked at him, her gaze holding something that might have been sadness, or might have been pride, or perhaps a complex blend of both. "Son," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the engine noise. "It never stopped. It just got quieter. Some duties don't have an expiration date etched on paper." The C-130 touched down at Camp Verdun as the last slivers of the sun were disappearing, painting the desert in shades of molten gold and deep, bruised red that would have been breathtakingly beautiful if they weren't accompanied by such a damn, relentless heat. Anya gathered her duffel, the familiar weight a comfort against her shoulder, and prepared to disappear back into the anonymity she'd meticulously maintained for the past 3 years. The rhythm of military life continued around her, a constant, unchanging pulse. But as she stepped off the aircraft onto the hard tarmac, she found Colonel Thorne waiting for her, a solitary figure silhouetted against the fading light, his expression unreadable. His presence was a stark punctuation mark to her brief, unsanctioned return. "We need to talk, Sharma," he said simply, his voice carrying clearly over the fading whir of the helicopter rotors. They walked in silence toward the command tent, the crunch of their boots on the gravel the only sound accompanying them. Past the evening shift change and the eternal routine of military life that continued, regardless of the small dramas playing out in its margins. The air was still thick with the smell of aviation fuel and dust, but now there was a faint metallic tang of tension, a subtle hum of anticipation hanging in the air. Inside the air-conditioned sanctuary of the command post, the cool air, a welcome respite, Thorne motioned to a worn leather armchair. He poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since sometime during the previous administration, thick and black, a brew only a hardened military officer could stomach. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken implications, the unspoken questions of consequences. He gestured for Anya to sit, then settled into his own chair behind a cluttered desk, his posture relaxed, almost too casual, indicating that the conversation was shifting into the kind that happened strictly off the record, away from prying ears, official logs, and the cold, unyielding scrutiny of regulations. "I've been making some calls," Thorne said without preamble, his gaze piercing, direct. "About you, about Sky Warden, about what happened today at Kestrel." Anya remained impassive, her face a neutral mask, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She knew this moment was coming. She knew that whatever came next would determine whether she walked out of this tent a free woman, retaining her hard-won civilian anonymity, or, under escort, facing the full, unforgiving weight of military law. Officially, Thorne continued, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the truly terrible coffee and grimacing slightly at its acrid taste. "There's no record of anyone matching your description being at Forward Operating Base Kestrel today." The technical staff, led by Master Sergeant Jenkins and assisted by Chief Petty Officer Davies, successfully repaired a dozen F-16s using standard protocols and achieved a successful outcome through skilled application of established procedures. A remarkable display of initiative and teamwork, one might say. "Officially," Anya repeated, her voice flat, mirroring his carefully chosen words. Her eyes, however, held a flicker of amusement. Unofficially, Thorne leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, the words heavy with unspoken meaning. "There are some very interested parties who are having a conversation with my superiors about your current activities, and whether those activities might be considered a violation of the terms of your technical retirement. They're rather particular about adherence to protocol, even when it results in mission failure." Anya felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the cold knot of dread that came from being backed into a corner by people who wielded regulations like weapons, who saw the world in black and white, lawful or unlawful. It was a pressure she knew well, the stifling weight of a system that prioritized order above all else, even operational necessity, even the successful completion of a critical mission. They're asking pointed questions about unconventional methods, about unauthorized personnel, and about certain legendary capabilities that shouldn't, by all accounts, exist outside of classified files. "And what did you tell these interested parties, Colonel?" Anya asked, her voice low, steady, a subtle challenge in her tone. Thorne allowed himself a genuine, if brief, smile, a flash of shared understanding. For the first time since she'd met him, it looked genuinely amused, a human crack in his polished military exterior. "I told them that heat exhaustion can cause all kinds of hallucinations. Desert environments are notorious for making people see things that aren't really there, especially when they're stressed and facing an seemingly insurmountable technical challenge. A collective optical illusion, perhaps." "Heat exhaustion," Anya repeated, a subtle flicker of understanding in her eyes, a recognition of the carefully constructed fiction Thorne was offering her. "Terrible thing. Affects memory, causes confusion, makes people believe they've witnessed events that couldn't possibly have happened. A truly unfortunate widespread affliction, wouldn't you say?" Thorne leaned back in his chair, studying Anya with the calculating, assessing look of someone who'd learned to navigate the treacherous space between what was right and what was authorized. between saving face and saving lives. Of course, the proper treatment for heat exhaustion is rest, hydration, and avoiding unnecessary exposure to stressful situations for the patient's well-being, naturally. Prolonged exposure could lead to further complications. Anya understood. She was being given a choice, a thinly veiled ultimatum, a single path laid out before her. Disappear quietly and permanently. Fade back into the shadows of her unofficial retirement, sever all ties, or face the kind of official scrutiny that would make her life, and, potentially, the lives of others connected to the now-exposed Sky Warden, very complicated, very quickly. It wasn't really a choice at all, not when she considered the potential fallout, the dozens of lives of good people who believed in the same oath she did, who would be caught in the bureaucratic crossfire. "I appreciate your concern for my health, Colonel," she said, her voice laced with a dry, almost bitter irony. "Just looking out for one of our own," Thorne replied, his eyes unwavering, holding her gaze. "Even the ones who officially don't exist anymore. There's a certain understanding that transcends ranks and regulations." Anya stood to leave, the conversation seemingly concluded, but Thorne held up a hand, stopping her just as she reached the door. "One more thing. That encrypted radio frequency you've been monitoring, the one that technically doesn't exist anymore, the one that's been mysteriously active." Anya's blood ran cold. A quiet dread coiled in her stomach. If they knew about the frequency, they knew about the informal network of former Sky Warden personnel who still maintained contact with each other, who still responded when one of their own needed help, when a critical operational gap needed to be filled. They knew about the promise that bound them together, even after the program had been officially disbanded. This was the ultimate leverage. "I wouldn't know anything about that, sir," she said carefully, her composure perfect, a wall of professional detachment. "Of course not," Thorne conceded, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. "But if such a frequency did exist, and if certain people were using it to coordinate unauthorized technical interventions, say in remote critical situations, well, that would be the kind of thing that might attract the wrong kind of attention. The very wrong kind of attention. Attention that would unravel a lot of carefully constructed fictions." Thorne pulled a small, sleek device from his desk drawer, a piece of military-grade signal detection and jamming equipment that Anya recognized immediately as high-tier surveillance technology. He placed the device on the desk between them, its small LED display showing nothing but static, a dead screen. "Funny thing about electronic signals in the desert," he mused, tapping the device with a thoughtful finger, his gaze fixed on Anya's face. "All kinds of interference. Solar flares, atmospheric distortion, equipment malfunctions. Sometimes signals just disappear, for days, for weeks even, if the technicians can't pinpoint the precise anomaly." He shrugged, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes. "Seems to be having some technical difficulties right now. Might take days to get it working properly again. Maybe weeks. Who knows, with all this desert heat and sand." Anya looked at the disabled surveillance equipment, then back at Thorne, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "You're giving me time to warn them. I'm giving you time to think about whether pursuing this particular hobby, this unofficial calling, is worth the consequences," Thorne corrected, his voice firm, his eyes locked on hers. "For you, and for anyone else who might be involved. The system, Sharma, has a way of being thorough when it feels threatened." The message was clear, stark. Shut down the network, or watch everyone she cared about, everyone connected to Sky Warden, get swept up in an investigation that would destroy their lives and careers, stripping them of their pensions, their reputations, everything they'd built. Anya had been expecting this moment for months, ever since she'd started responding to calls from former students and colleagues who found themselves in situations that regular channels couldn't or wouldn't address. She had always known this was the price. "How long do I have?" she asked, her voice tight, a thin thread of steel. "This signal detector should be working again by the end of the week," Thorne said, picking it up and turning it over in his hand, a deliberate, almost theatrical gesture. "Assuming our technicians can figure out what's wrong with it. But don't push it, Anya. My influence has limits, and these are powerful people." Anya nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and headed for the tent flap, the conversation hanging in the tense air. But Thorn's voice stopped her, cutting through the silence. "Before you go, Anya," the use of her first name carried weight, an acknowledgement that they were speaking as soldiers, as fellow travelers in a world of complex loyalties, rather than as representatives of competing bureaucracies. "What you did today, it saved an entire squadron. It matters, regardless of what the paperwork says. But the people who are asking questions, they don't care about saving squadrons. They care about protecting institutions and maintaining control, about preventing the kind of precedent you've just set." "I know," Anya said, her back to him, her voice low. "Do you?" Thorn challenged, his voice quiet, almost a plea. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you're willing to sacrifice everything you've built over the past 3 years for people who can't even officially acknowledge your existence, for a program that's been erased from the books." Anya turned back to face him, and for a moment, Thorn saw past the careful composure to the exhaustion and steely determination that drove her, the fire that still burned beneath the surface. "Colonel," she said, her voice unwavering, clear and resonant, 20 years ago, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath didn't come with an expiration date, sir. It's not a contract that expires with my retirement papers." "The Constitution doesn't require you to throw your life away for people who won't even remember your name," Thorn countered. "Maybe not," Anya said quietly, "but it requires me to live with the person I see in the mirror every morning. And I'd rather live with someone who tried and failed, someone who stood for what was right, than someone who had the chance to help and chose not to take it, because it was inconvenient or dangerous." She left Thorn sitting in his air-conditioned command post, staring at the disabled surveillance equipment, its dead screen, a silent testament to the fragile, unstated truce they had forged, wondering whether he'd just saved Anya Sharma's life, or simply given her enough rope to hang herself with. Outside, the desert night was settling over Camp Verdun with the sudden temperature drop that made the Middle East simultaneously unbearable and breathtakingly beautiful. The vast, star-strewn sky seemed to stretch endlessly, indifferent to the intricate dramas playing out beneath it. Anya walked toward her temporary quarters, the dust crunching softly under her boots, passing groups of soldiers enjoying the brief respite from the day's oppressive heat. Their conversations, muted by the growing distance, mixed with the omnipresent hum of generators and the distant, rhythmic thud of helicopters returning from patrol. She had 72 hours, maybe 96 if Thorn's generosity stretched, if his technical difficulties with the surveillance equipment were truly persistent. 72 hours to contact everyone in the Skywarden network, to warn them that the walls were closing in, that their clandestine existence was at an end. 72 hours to give them the chance to disappear back into their official lives, to erase their digital footprints, to become truly invisible before the investigations swept them all up. This was the ultimate test of her leadership, not on the field of battle, but in the quiet, treacherous world of bureaucracy and intelligence. It was 72 hours to decide whether Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma was going to fade quietly into the retirement the military had planned for her, becoming just another anonymous face, or make one final, defiant stand that would probably destroy her, but might just ensure the safety and anonymity of a network of good people, a network that had saved countless lives and missions when no one else could, a network built on shared values and an unbroken oath. As she reached her quarters, the small, anonymous room a temporary refuge, Anya's secure phone buzzed with an incoming message on the frequency that officially didn't exist. The screen glowed with an urgent notification. Another call for help. Another squadron in trouble. Another opportunity to honor the promises that bound her to a brotherhood that transcended official channels and bureaucratic limitations. It was an instinctive pull, a deep-seated reflex that had defined her entire adult life. She looked at the message for a long moment, the glowing text, a silent challenge, a siren call to action. Then, with a profound sense of resignation, a decision made not from fear but from a weary understanding of the larger picture, she deleted it without responding. Some battles you could fight, even against overwhelming odds. Others, however, would only serve to destroy everyone you cared about, pulling them down into the vortex of a bureaucratic purge. The trick, the ultimate wisdom she had acquired over 2 decades, was knowing the difference, knowing when to draw the line between a salvageable fight and a futile sacrifice. Anya's phone rang at 0300 hours, its encrypted frequency crackling to life with the kind of urgent static that meant someone, somewhere, was in serious trouble. A cold, familiar dread seeped into her bones, a premonition of the inevitable. She was already reaching for the device before she was fully awake, the reflexes of 20 years in the military overriding her conscious decision to stay off the network, overriding Thorne's warning. Her fingers hovered over the familiar buttons, a silent battle raging within her. "Sharma," she said quietly, her voice a little rough with sleep, glancing toward the thin walls of her temporary quarters to make sure she hadn't woken anyone. The sound of her own name, a call to duty, echoed in the quiet room. "Anya, thank God." The voice belonged to Marcus Walsh, former Sky Warden technician turned civilian contractor. His voice tight with desperation, laced with an urgency that sent shivers down her spine. She'd worked with him in Syria back when they were both officially non-existent, a shadow team operating on the fringes, invisible to the larger military machine. "We've got a situation in Afghanistan. Remote outpost, 12 F-16s with critical system failures, and the regular supply lines are cut off due to unprecedented weather conditions. We're talking complete comms blackout, no air support for days. They're predicting hostile ground movements in the area within the next 24 hours. Those birds are sitting ducks." Anya felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with emergency calls, the instinct to immediately spring into action, followed immediately by the cold, hard reality of her current situation, the fresh sting of Thorne's warning. "Marcus, I can't. I know about Camp Verdun. Thorne is watching. The network is compromised." "I know about Camp Verdun, Anya," Marcus interrupted, his voice breaking, desperate, pushing past her resistance. "Word travels fast in our community. We know you risked everything. We know what Thorne said. But Anya, this is bad. Worse than you think. We're talking about American pilots grounded, completely vulnerable, critical assets potentially compromised, in a place where help isn't coming through normal channels. We've confirmed enemy intel that hostile forces are converging. They're predicting a full assault within the next 24 hours. Those birds are sitting ducks, and so are their pilots." Anya closed her eyes, feeling the immense weight of Thorne's warning pressing down on her like a physical force, the grim choice laid bare. 72 hours to shut down the network. 72 hours to disappear back into official retirement, and let someone else worry about the squadrons who fell through the cracks, about the pilots who faced imminent danger. This was it, the final, defining moment. "How many birds, Marcus?" she asked, her voice tight, a thin thread of steel, the question ripping through her, knowing the answer might just break her resolve. 12 confirmed F-16s, total system collapse, mountain outpost completely cut off by the storm system. Regular resupply and extraction won't be possible for at least 18 hours, maybe longer. They're sitting ducks without air support, and ground forces are too far for immediate defense. They need those jets to fly. 18 hours. Anya had seen what 18 hours could do to a grounded squadron in a remote, hostile location, their vulnerability increasing with every passing minute. She'd seen the difference between arriving in time and arriving too late, and she'd carried the weight of those differences for the rest of her career. The ghosts of missions where they hadn't made it in time, the silent burden of lost lives. "Who else is responding?" she asked, her mind already racing, calculating, assessing the impossible, searching for any sliver of hope. "Rebecca Thompson is already en route from Germany, somehow slipped past their heightened surveillance. She's a ghost. David Kim is trying to get authorization from his current posting in Japan, but it's a long shot. He's stuck in red tape. But Anya, we need someone with command experience. Someone who can coordinate multiple assets and make the hard calls when things go sideways. Someone who can still fix a squadron when the book says it's impossible. Someone who knows the terrain, the tech, and the enemy. We need you." Anya knew what Marcus was really asking. He wasn't just requesting another technician for the mission. He was asking her to take command of an operation that would involve multiple former Sky Warden personnel, her friends, her family in the shadows, operating outside official channels in a hostile environment, a direct defiance of Thorne's warning, and a guaranteed path to exposure. The kind of operation that would put everyone involved at risk of court-martial, or worse, if it went wrong. The kind of operation that could save critical American assets and the lives of the pilots who flew them, if it went right. The weight of their trust, of their unspoken plea was almost unbearable, pushing her to the brink. "Marcus, listen to me carefully," she said, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper, every word carefully chosen, every syllable imbued with the gravity of her decision. "There are people watching the network. Powerful people. People who know about the frequency, who are tracking communications. This isn't just a risk to the mission. If we do this, if we activate the network for this, we're risking everyone who's ever been part of Skywarden, everyone who's ever answered a call. This is the end of everything we built. They will burn it all down." "I know, Anya," Marcus said quietly, his voice raw with emotion, accepting the immense risk. "We all know. But Anya, these are our people. Americans in trouble, with nowhere else to turn, facing total loss, likely death. If we don't help them, who will? What was it all for then? All the training, all the sacrifices, all the risks we took before. Was it just for us to disappear when it truly matters?" Anya walked to the small window of her quarters and looked out at the desert night, where the stars were brilliant against the black sky and the temperature had dropped enough to make the heat of the day seem like a distant memory. Somewhere out there, in mountains she couldn't see and weather she couldn't imagine, American F-16s were grounded, vulnerable, and their pilots were likely facing imminent attack, waiting for help that might never come. It was the same choice she'd faced countless times, but the stakes had never been higher. The potential for personal and network annihilation never so great. The oath resonated in her very being, a silent command that transcended all else. "Give me 5 minutes, Marcus," she said finally, her voice resolute. All traces of doubt gone, replaced by an iron will. "I need to make some calls. The network is going silent after this. One last hurrah." The first call was to Rebecca Thompson, who answered on the second ring despite the early hour in Germany, her voice crisp and alert, betraying no sign of sleep. Rebecca had been Anya's deputy during some of Skywarden's most difficult operations. The kind of person who could rebuild a damaged targeting computer in a combat zone while mortar rounds were falling around her and still manage to get every system back online, a true master of her craft. "Beck, it's Anya. Marcus filled you in?" "Already packing, boss," Rebecca said without preamble, her voice a comforting, familiar sound, a lifeline across continents. "Heard the situation. Bad. Really bad. But Anya, I'm hearing rumors about heightened surveillance, about a specific, targeted investigation. Is this a trap? Are we walking into something bigger than a rescue mission? Something designed to flush us out?" "Probably," Anya said honestly, staring at the message Thorne had sent, the static on the non-existent frequency a chilling reminder of their exposure. "The network is compromised. If we do this, if we make this move, there's a good chance it's the last time we do anything like this. We might be burning the bridges behind us permanently. They're waiting for us to make a mistake." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, the sound of her own rapid breathing echoing faintly over the line as she considered the immense implications, the irreversible nature of Anya's decision. "How many birds are we talking about, Anya? What's the confirmed threat level for the pilots and the outpost?" 12 confirmed F-16s, total system collapse. High threat of ground forces, confirmed enemy movements, they're converging. American pilots, Beck. Vulnerable, exposed, no air support. A pause, then Rebecca's voice, firm and unwavering, tinged with a steely resolve that mirrored Anya's own. "Then we go, Anya. Whatever the consequences, we go. That's what Skywarden means, always has. I'll meet you at the Kuwait staging area. Give me the precise coordinates and mission parameters. Time is short." The second call was to Colonel Marcus Thorne, who answered his secure line with the groggy irritation of someone who'd been woken from a deep, well-deserved sleep, his voice laced with foreboding. "Sharma? This better be important after our last conversation. That signal detector is still malfunctioning incidentally, just as we discussed." "Colonel," Anya began, her voice low, urgent, cutting straight to the point, leaving no room for pleasantries. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. If American F-16s, a full squadron of them, were crippled in a remote outpost, cut off from all support, facing imminent ground threat, and if you
had the ability to get them back in the air through unofficial channels, knowing it would expose an entire clandestine network, knowing it would expose me definitively, what would you do?" Thorne was quiet for a long, agonizing moment, the silence stretching taut between them. Anya could almost hear him thinking, weighing the immense implications of the question, the delicate, agonizing balance between duty and protocol, between the cold, hard reality of the rules and the desperate, burning need to protect his own. The fate of many now rested on his answer. Is this hypothetical, Sharma? Because it sounds remarkably specific, far beyond mere speculation. No, sir, it's not hypothetical. The squadron at Firebase Kilo 7. EMP strike. Ground threat escalating by the hour. They're dead in the water without immediate intervention. How many, Anya? He asked. His voice now devoid of irritation, replaced by a grim seriousness that betrayed his deep concern. 12. A full squadron. American pilots, Colonel. They're sitting ducks, exposed, with enemy forces closing in. This is not just a tactical loss. It could be a massacre. Thorne sighed heavily, a deep, shuddering breath that resonated with the sound of a career officer being forced to choose between competing loyalties. A profound weariness in his voice, but also an undeniable resolve. Anya, you know what I told you about the surveillance equipment. You know what's going to happen if you get caught operating outside official channels. You know the full force of the system that will be brought to bear against you, and against everyone associated with you. They will dismantle it all, piece by piece. I know, sir. I understand the risks. But, Colonel, these are American F-16s, our most vital assets, and more importantly, our people's lives are on the line. They're going to be destroyed if someone doesn't get them flying before that ground threat materializes. We're talking about direct engagement, not just a technical problem anymore. And if you get caught, Sharma, Thorne pressed, his voice hardening, each word a hammer blow, a stark reminder of the consequences. Everyone who's ever been associated with Sky Warden is going to face investigation, court-martial, possibly criminal charges, ruin. You're talking about destroying the lives of dozens of good people, loyal people, who followed you to save 12 aircraft that are probably going to be recovered anyway, albeit later, and with greater loss, possibly after their pilots have been overrun. Anya felt the familiar, hot surge of anger that came from hearing critical assets and the lives of those who flew them written off as acceptable losses. The cold, pragmatic calculus of military strategy that sometimes sacrificed individuals for the larger, often abstract, good. Probably isn't definitely, Colonel. And the last time I checked, the American military didn't abandon its assets or its people just because recovering them was inconvenient, or because it created bureaucratic headaches. This is about honor, sir, about who we say we are. Damn it, Anya! Thorne was fully awake now, his voice carrying the frustrated authority of someone who'd spent too many years navigating the treacherous space between what was right and what was possible, between the letter of the law and the spirit of the oath. You know I can't officially authorize this. You know I can't even officially know about it. My hands are tied by every regulation in the book. This is your choice and yours alone. I'm not asking for official authorization, sir, Anya stated, her voice unwavering, a steel rod of conviction. I'm asking what you would do. As a commander, as a soldier, when everything else has failed. Thorne was quiet for another long, agonizing moment, the weight of his decision palpable even over the satellite link. He knew the cost of his answer, the personal and professional risk he was about to take. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom and carefully maintained principles, a voice of quiet conviction that cut through the static. I would remember that some things matter more than career advancement. I would remember that the oath we took doesn't come with disclaimers about inconvenient timing or personal risk. It's an absolute commitment, Anya, to our nation and to our people. And the surveillance equipment? Thorne paused, and Anya held her breath. A sliver of desperate hope rekindled, knowing this was his offer, his final act of support. Funny thing about electronic systems in desert environments, Anya. All kinds of unpredictable malfunctions. Solar flares, extreme temperature fluctuations, sand getting into everything, inexplicable power surges, equipment failures that can last for days without warning. Especially when they're handled a certain way, perhaps with a touch of ingenuity. Anya understood. Thorne was giving her cover, buying her time to complete the mission before the official investigation resumed with full force. He was giving her a plausible deniability, a window of opportunity to operate under the radar. It wasn't authorization, but it was something almost as valuable. The tacit recognition that some choices transcended regulations and bureaucratic convenience. He was giving her a window, a chance. Thank you, Colonel, Anya said, her voice filled with a rare, genuine gratitude, a a silent promise of her own. "Don't thank me, Sharma," Thorne said quietly, his voice tight with the strain of his own personal risk, a heavy burden assumed. "Just get those birds flying, and make damn sure our people come home. All of them." Anya ended the call and immediately dialed Marcus back, her fingers flying across the keypad, a new sense of urgency in her movements. "How fast can you get me to the staging area, Marcus?" "No more waiting, we go. There's a transport leaving from Kuwait in 4 hours. Military contractor flight, off the official manifest. Already got Rebecca on it, she's a force of nature. But Anya, once you get on that plane, there's no turning back. If this goes wrong, if we fail to hide our tracks, if they catch us." "If this goes wrong, Marcus," Anya interrupted, her voice steel, cutting through his hesitation. "American F-16s are lost, their pilots are vulnerable, and an outpost falls. Everything else is just paperwork. Get me on that flight. Get everyone on that flight." "Roger that, Anya," Marcus said, a renewed strength and resolve in his voice. "I'll send you the details now." "Godspeed, boss, this is it." Anya hung up and began packing with the systematic efficiency of someone who'd done this particular dance more times than she could count, her movements precise and automatic. Personal diagnostic kit, advanced encryption modules, specialized tools that weren't standard issue but had proven their worth in situations where standard issue wasn't good enough. Tools that were illegal to possess outside of a highly classified context. As she packed, Anya thought about Liam Davies, buzzing with renewed purpose in a repair tent, because someone had been willing to bend the rules to save his squadron. She thought about the network of Skywarden veterans who'd maintained their commitment to each other and to the pilots they'd sworn to protect, even after their program had been officially disbanded. Their loyalty and unyielding force, a family forged in fire. Most of all, she thought about the oath she'd taken 20 years ago, standing ramrod straight in her crisp uniform, a fresh-faced recruit, ready to serve. The promise that had never been officially rescinded. To support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Some promises were worth keeping, regardless of the cost. Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma was about to find out exactly how much this one, her final promise, was going to cost her. The flight to Afghanistan took 14 arduous hours through airspace that officially didn't exist, on a transport that wasn't on any manifest, carrying passengers who had no official reason to be there, their very presence a violation of countless regulations, each mile a step further into the abyss of official non-existence. Anya spent most of the time reviewing satellite imagery and weather reports, meticulously preparing for a mission that would test every single fiber of her being, everything she'd learned in 20 years of military technical expertise. She pored over topographical maps, memorizing every ridge, every potential hiding spot. The mountain outpost was designated Firebase Kilo 7, a remote observation post perched precariously on a ridgeline that provided strategic oversight in a valley frequently used by insurgent forces to move supplies and personnel. Normally, the base was supplied by helicopter, but the severe, freak weather system that had moved through the region had brought winds that made flight operations impossible and heavy, unseasonal snow that had blocked the only ground route in or out, effectively isolating it. Adding to the dire situation, the unexpected electromagnetic pulse, EMP, had detonated nearby, not a physical explosion, but a localized burst of energy, a silent killer of electronics. It had fried the avionics of all 12 F-16s parked on the tarmac, leaving the base's single flight engineer overwhelmed by a system-wide catastrophic failure that exceeded his training and resources, leaving them vulnerable and blind. The official recovery team wouldn't be possible for at least 18 hours, probably longer, given the weather and terrain, and the F-16s, now dead in the water, their multi-million-dollar systems inert, couldn't afford to wait that long in such an exposed and vulnerable position, with enemy forces rapidly converging. Anya studied the tactical situation, with the focused intensity of someone who understood that every single detail mattered, when millions of dollars of hardware, and the lives of American pilots who might soon be facing ground threats, hung precariously in the balance. The weather was breaking, but agonizingly slowly, a cruel tease, revealing patches of treacherous, icy terrain. The mountain terrain was a labyrinth of jagged peaks and narrow passes, dangerous even in good conditions. The landing zone near the base was small, exposed, and surrounded by ridges that could easily hide enemy observation posts, making any approach a high-risk gamble. It was exactly the kind of mission that Skywarden had been designed for: high-risk, time-sensitive, no official support, and absolutely critical to the pilots who needed their birds airborne. and to the larger mission that depended on their air superiority. Rebecca Thompson met Anya at the staging area, a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan that served as a grim jumping-off point for operations in the treacherous mountain regions. Rebecca looked exactly the same as she had 3 years ago, when Sky Warden had been disbanded, compact, efficient, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of working in situations where mistakes got people killed, where precision was the difference between success and catastrophic failure. There was no time for pleasantries, only the urgent demands of the mission. Situation report, Anya said without preamble, her voice cutting through the thrum of the base as they quickly loaded their specialized equipment onto a helicopter that bore no identifying markings, a ghost bird for a ghost mission, and carried a crew that asked no questions about their destination or mission, their faces stoic and knowing, eyes fixed on the horizon. 12 F-16s, all Block 50s, Rebecca said, consulting a ruggedized tablet that showed the grim technical data transmitted from Firebase Kilo 7, the digital lines a chaotic, meaningless mess. Primary flight control computers offline, navigation systems dead, weapons integration modules completely unresponsive. It looks like a localized EMP burst. Hit them hard, fried their entire nervous system. A complete catastrophic failure. Our on-site tech, a young airman named Peterson, says he's tried every diagnostic, every reset. He's good, but this is way beyond standard field repair. They're basically multi-million-dollar static displays, vulnerable to attack. Anya studied the data, her mind automatically calculating resources, timing, and probability of success, the sheer complexity of the task ahead. The EMP damage was the critical case, a devastating, system-wide failure that required immediate, highly specialized intervention and couldn't wait for official recovery teams, which might take days or even weeks to arrive, by which time it would be too late. What's the technical situation at the base? Anya pressed, her gaze intense. One flight engineer, Airman First Class Daniel Peterson, Rebecca replied, scrolling through the tablet. Good kid, solid training, but he's dealing with failures that are far beyond his experience level. He's done good work trying to keep the systems from totally crashing, from cascading into unrecoverable states, but he's out of options, he's burned out. They're holding a perimeter, but if those F-16s can't move or defend themselves, they're just targets for the converging enemy forces. Anya nodded, understanding the desperate position Peterson found himself in, the immense pressure under which he had operated alone. She'd been there herself years ago, dealing with catastrophic failures that exceeded her training, knowing that making the wrong choice meant watching critical assets become scrap metal. Or worse, leaving pilots without their vital air support, abandoning them to their fate. It was the kind of pressure that either broke people or forged them into the kind of technicians who could handle anything. Flight time, 90 minutes to target, assuming the weather holds. Rebecca continued, her voice grim, her eyes on the swirling clouds above. But Anya, I need to tell you something about the extraction plan. It's less than ideal. In fact, it's non-existent for us. What about it? Anya asked, her voice calm, betraying no emotion, her face a mask of resolve. There isn't one. The helicopter can get us in, but the weather window isn't wide enough for a round trip. The storm system is still too unpredictable, too violent for a return flight immediately. We're going to be on the ground until it moves through completely. The pilots for the F-16s will have to wait for us to fix them before they can even attempt to take off. We're effectively stranding ourselves at Kilo 7, right in the path of the converging enemy. How long? Anya asked, her voice flat, the harsh reality sinking in. Best case, 12 hours until the weather breaks enough for us to extract with the birds. Worst case, 48 hours or more. Possibly longer if the secondary storm front moves in as predicted. We're talking days, Anya, completely isolated. Anya absorbed this information without changing expression. Being stranded at a remote mountain outpost for up to 2 days, with an escalating ground threat, was not just ideal, it was a deadly, calculated risk, a gamble with their lives. But it wasn't the worst situation she'd faced during her Sky Warden years, and she wouldn't back down now. Defense situation at the base? 15 soldiers, well-trained, good defensive positions, adequate ammunition and supplies. They're dug in, they'll fight to the last man. But Anya, if we're there for more than a day, or if that ground assault hits before the F-16s are airborne, we're going to be completely cut off from any kind of support. No resupply, no comms, no reinforcements. We'll be on our own, fixing 12 dead birds under hostile eyes, a last stand. Anya understood the full gravity of the situation, the immense risk undeniable, the potential for disaster chillingly real. "We go anyway," she said, her voice quiet but firm, a statement of unwavering purpose. Rebecca smiled, a rare, genuine expression of fierce determination, the first flicker of anything other than professional focus that Anya had seen from her since they'd been reunited, a sign of her complete trust. "I was hoping you'd say that, boss. Let's get these birds in the air, and then figure out how to get ourselves out." The helicopter lifted off into gray skies that threatened more snow, its rotors beating a furious rhythm, a powerful thrum that vibrated through the airframe, carrying two women who officially didn't exist toward a mission that officially wasn't happening. To save American F-16s that officially weren't supposed to need saving. Anya watched the terrain pass beneath them, noting the steep, unforgiving valleys and exposed ridgelines that made this part of Afghanistan one of the most dangerous places on Earth for military operations. Every peak, every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat, a sniper's perch, an ambush point. As they flew deeper into the mountains, the landscape became harsher, more desolate, a silent testament to the unforgiving nature of the mission. Anya's secure phone buzzed with a terse, final encrypted message from Colonel Thorne. The screen glowed with a single line of text. "Signal detector, still malfunctioning. Estimated repair time, now extended to 96 hours. Good hunting, Sharma. Don't disappoint me." Anya showed the message to Rebecca, who read it and nodded once, a shared understanding passing between them. They had 4 days before the official investigation resumed, before the walls closed in around them, before their very existence was challenged. 4 days to complete the mission, get those F-16s flying, and get back to their official anonymous lives before the bureaucracy caught up, before the hammer fell. 4 days to prove that some promises were worth keeping, regardless of the personal cost. The helicopter approached Firebase Kilo 7 as the snow began to fall again, fat, heavy flakes that reduced visibility to near zero and made the already difficult landing even more treacherous, a white curtain descending over the landscape, obscuring the treacherous peaks. Anya could see the small base perched precariously on its ridge like an eagle's nest, a tiny, defiant speck against the vast, inhospitable mountains, surrounded by steep drops on 3 sides, and connected to the outside world by a single narrow ice-covered trail that was now completely impassable. "This is it," the pilot announced over the intercom, his voice strained but steady, fighting against the buffeting winds. "Weather's closing in fast. I can give you 30 seconds on the ground, no more. Get what you need and move, move, move." Anya and Rebecca grabbed their equipment, their movements practiced, economical, preparing for the kind of rapid deployment that had become second nature during their Skywarden years. As the helicopter touched down with a jolt and a furious swirl of snow and rotor wash, they jumped onto the landing zone, their heavy bags thudding against the icy ground, and ran toward the base, carrying specialized technical equipment that could save critical American assets, and carrying the immeasurable weight of promises that transcended official channels and bureaucratic limitations. Behind them, the helicopter lifted off immediately, its powerful rotors beating against the swirling snow, disappearing into the gray, swirling sky like it had never been there at all, leaving them utterly alone, 2 figures isolated against the vast, indifferent landscape. Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma was back in the field, doing the work she'd been born to do, in a place where her skills mattered more than her official status, and where American F-16s, and the pilots who flew them, needed her help more than they needed proper paperwork. For the first time in 3 years, despite the immense danger, despite the cold, biting wind and the swirling snow, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged, precisely where she was needed. A sense of purpose, long dormant, flared to life within her. Firebase Kilo 7 was smaller than Anya had expected, a collection of prefabricated buildings and defensive positions carved into the rocky terrain of an Afghan mountain ridge, fortified with razor wire and sandbags, with fighting positions that provided overlapping fields of fire down the treacherous valleys that stretched away in all directions. But Anya's attention was focused entirely on the small, reinforced hangar that served as the base's primary maintenance facility, its corrugated metal exterior battered by the wind, where 12 F-16s, their sleek bodies now inert and lifeless, lay wounded, tended by a young flight engineer who looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days, his face etched with strain and despair. Airman First Class Daniel Peterson met them at the entrance to the hangar, his uniform smudged with grease and oil, his eyes bloodshot from endless, fruitless attempts. "Ma'am," he said, his voice raw with exhaustion, a profound relief washing over his face at the sight of them. "I've never been so glad to see anyone in my life. The systems have been completely dead for the past 18 hours, utterly unresponsive, and I'm running out of options. We've tried everything in the book, every diagnostic, every procedure, but nothing. They're just dead." Anya was already moving toward the first F-16, her experienced eye automatically assessing each aircraft and prioritizing their technical needs, her mind sifting through the layers of visible damage and potential hidden failures, looking beyond the obvious. The F-16s stood like silent, broken giants, their complex systems dark, their powerful engines quiet, their usual predatory grace replaced by a desolate stillness. "How long since the EMP strike?" Anya asked, already reaching for her specialized diagnostic tools. A compact, custom-built device that hummed faintly as she powered it on, its screen glowing with intricate data displays. 18 hours and 35 minutes, ma'am," Peterson replied with the precision of someone who'd been counting every agonizing minute since the devastating pulse had struck. Anya knelt beside the first F-16 and began her examination with the focused efficiency of someone who'd done this assessment more times than she could count, her fingers expertly probing access panels, connecting cables to diagnostic ports, a silent dance of expertise. What she found confirmed her worst fears: deep-level corruption in the flight control computers, navigation systems completely fried, weapons integration modules unresponsive, the aircraft's entire digital nervous system catastrophically compromised, a network of failures too vast for conventional repair. It was the kind of complex system trauma that couldn't wait for official recovery teams, which might be days away, or proper, fully equipped repair facilities. This was a ground-up rebuild in a combat zone. "Rebecca, I need you to set up the clean room for neural network recalibration," Anya said without looking up from the intricate wiring harness she was dissecting, her voice firm, resolute, cutting through the hum of the hangar. "We're going to have to rebuild the core flight logic from scratch, one bird at a time. This isn't just a component swap, it's a reanimation. We're bringing them back to life." "Copy that, Anya," Rebecca replied, her movement swift and precise, already unpacking specialized instruments from their sealed cases, with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd performed miracles in conditions far worse than a well-equipped mountain hangar. The hum of their specialized equipment filled the tent, a faint but hopeful counterpoint to the howling wind outside, a beacon in the storm. For the next 48 grueling hours, Anya and Rebecca worked with a focused intensity that bordered on the superhuman, a relentless, silent battle against time and impossible odds, the kind of concentrated effort that had made them legendary among Skywarden personnel. They operated on the F-16s in a hangar that was barely more than a reinforced metal shed, its walls rattling under the incessant wind and snow, using proprietary tools they'd carried in their personal kits and techniques they'd learned in covert test sites across 3 continents, methods that were utterly unknown to mainstream military technicians, almost like forbidden knowledge. Peterson watched in stunned amazement as Anya performed procedures he'd only read about in highly classified white papers, if at all, her hands moving with the sure, almost magical confidence of someone who'd learned to resurrect dead systems in places where making mistakes meant losing multi-million-dollar assets, and potentially, the lives of entire flight crews. Rebecca assisted with the practice teamwork of someone who'd worked with Anya in situations far more dangerous than this, anticipating needs and providing support with minimal communication, their 2 minds operating as one, a seamless, efficient unit. They worked through the night, powered by stale coffee and a grim determination, the only light, the harsh glare of work lamps, their shadows dancing on the cold metal walls. When Anya finally stepped back from the last F-16, its systems fully online, its lights blinking a healthy, vibrant green, a profound exhaustion settled over her, a deep, bone-weary ache that reached into her very soul, but it was accompanied by a surge of triumph. "She'll fly," she said simply, stripping off her technical gloves, the words hoarse but clear, a testament to their victory. Airman Peterson, who had been hovering nearby, staring, dumbfounded, at the resurrected aircraft, stumbled back, a profound relief washing over his face, mixed with awe. All 12 F-16s were now fully operational, their critical systems recalibrated, their targeting computers humming with renewed life, their powerful engines now capable of full, sustained flight. "Ma'am," Peterson said, his voice filled with awe and unadulterated wonder, barely a whisper. "I've been a flight engineer for 4 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. How did you know how to handle damage like that?" It was beyond anything I've ever trained for, beyond anything I thought possible. Anya looked at the young airman who'd done his best under impossible circumstances, who'd kept a squadron from total collapse long enough for help to arrive, who'd performed his duties with the kind of dedication that made her proud to have served in the same uniform. Experience, she said simply, her voice thick with fatigue, and caring more about the aircraft and the pilots than about the rules, than about what a manual tells you is possible. Sometimes, the book isn't enough. Sometimes, you have to write your own. The storm continued for 2 more days, a relentless blizzard that kept Firebase Kilo 7 completely cut off from the outside world, a tiny island of humanity and technology against the white fury of the mountains. During this time, Anya and Rebecca worked tirelessly to ensure the F-16s' absolute stability, running continuous diagnostics and fine-tuning their systems, ensuring every parameter was perfect. They used the precious, unexpected time to teach Peterson advanced diagnostic techniques, sharing knowledge that had been acquired through years of operating in conditions that weren't covered in any manual, passing on the forbidden wisdom of Sky Warden, ensuring a piece of their legacy lived on. On the morning of the 3rd day, the weather finally broke enough for helicopter operations to resume, the sun breaking through the clouds, casting harsh shadows on the pristine snow, glinting off the newly operational F-16s. Anya watched from the landing zone as the 12 F-16s, one by one, took off, their engines roaring to life with a sound that was music to her ears, a triumphant symphony of restored power, their sleek bodies climbing effortlessly into the clear morning sky, disappearing into the blue expanse, ready to rejoin the fight. Their internal systems repaired, their readiness excellent. They were going to continue their mission to protect, to defend, to fly. 12 American F-16s were back in the fight, their operational capability restored, because 2 women who officially didn't exist had been willing to risk everything to honor promises that transcended official channels and bureaucratic limitations. As the last F-16 disappeared into the distance, a vanishing speck against the vast sky, Anya felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and profound exhaustion that came from completing a difficult mission, a bone-deep weariness that settled over her like a heavy blanket. But this time, there was something else. A poignant knowing, the silent, almost certain knowledge that this might be the last time she operated under Sky Warden protocols. The last time she was able to respond when American aircraft needed help that couldn't be provided through official channels, when no one else would or could. The extraction helicopter arrived 2 hours later, its powerful rotors kicking up a flurry of snow and dust, carrying Anya and Rebecca back toward the official world of regulations and investigations, and carefully maintained boundaries between what was authorized and what was necessary. As they flew through clear skies toward the forward operating base where this mission had begun, the desert shimmering below, Anya's secure phone buzzed with a terse final message from Colonel Thorne. The screen glowed with the stark words, "Surveillance equipment repairs completed ahead of schedule. Investigation resuming immediately. Recommend immediate return to official status. Be advised, they are looking for irregularities. They know." Anya showed the message to Rebecca, who read it and nodded once, her face grim, their eyes meeting in a silent acknowledgement of the inevitable. Their time outside the official system was ending, and whatever came next would depend on how well they could blend back into their authorized roles, how quickly they could erase their presence, before anyone noticed they'd been gone, before the net tightened irrevocably. But as the helicopter carried them back toward uncertain futures and possible severe consequences, Anya felt no regret about the choices she'd made. She'd kept her promise to Liam Davies, she'd kept her promise to the grounded pilots, and now she'd kept her promise to 12 more American F-16s that could now continue to protect those they were sworn to defend. Some promises were worth keeping, regardless of the personal cost. Some oaths didn't come with expiration dates. And sometimes the most important work happened in the shadows, far from official recognition, done by people whose names would never appear in headlines or history books, whose sacrifices would never be officially acknowledged, but whose actions made all the difference to the pilots who flew home safely, because someone cared enough to show up when they were needed most. Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma closed her eyes and let the familiar rhythm of rotor wash settle into her bones one last time, a resonant vibration that seemed to confirm her life's true purpose, carrying with her the quiet, undeniable knowledge that she'd honored every promise that truly mattered, regardless of what the future might hold, regardless of the consequences she might now face. 3 days later, Anya was back at Camp Verdum, sitting in the same air-conditioned command post where Colonel Thorne had first warned her about the impending investigation. The air here was cool, sterile, a stark contrast to the dust and heat of the field, a world away from the desperate fight she had just left. This time, however, the conversation was different. The tension was still present, a subtle undercurrent, but it was laced with something else, a strange, almost respectful finality. "The surveillance equipment is working perfectly now, Sharma," Thorne said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, pouring coffee from a fresh pot. "No sign of any unauthorized communications, no evidence of unofficial operations, no indication that anyone has been using disbanded protocols to conduct unauthorized technical interventions. A very clean slate, wouldn't you say? Everything is back to normal, officially speaking." Anya accepted the coffee, its bitter warmth a stark contrast to the cold calculation in Thorne's eyes, and waited, knowing this was the last chapter, the final curtain call for her shadow life. "There was some concern about a few days of missing surveillance data, of course," Thorne continued, swirling the coffee in his mug, his gaze fixed on the swirling liquid as if it held all the answers. "A significant blackout, truly unprecedented. But equipment malfunctions are common in desert environments. Solar flares, extreme temperature fluctuations, sand getting into everything, inexplicable power surges, that sort of thing. Highly unpredictable." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, holding her gaze with a mix of weary understanding and professional warning, a silent acknowledgement of the fragile, unstated truce they had established, a testament to Thorne's calculated risks on her behalf. "Fortunately, there's no evidence that anything significant happened during that particular equipment malfunction. Nothing that can be definitively proven, at least. No paper trail to follow back to you. Your ghost operation leaves no trace." "Fortunately," Anya agreed, her voice flat, the single word an acknowledgement of the fragile, unstated truce they had established, a testament to Thorne's calculated risks on her behalf. "The investigation is being closed due to lack of definitive evidence. It seems that Sky Warden really was disbanded 3 years ago, and anyone who might have been associated with it has successfully transitioned to official retirement or legitimate civilian employment. A triumph of bureaucratic efficiency, in a way, a clean sweep." Thorne set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, looking directly at Anya, his gaze unwavering, stern, yet with a hint of something deeper, something beyond mere protocol. "Of course, that doesn't mean the surveillance will end, Sharma. Quite the opposite. Future communications on certain frequencies will continue to be monitored with extreme vigilance, and any evidence of future unauthorized operations will be dealt with accordingly, with the full force of military law. There will be no more heat exhaustion excuses, no more technical malfunctions. This is the end of the line for Sky Warden. For good." Anya understood. The network was finished. The promise that had bound Sky Warden veterans together, the unofficial brotherhood that had operated in the shadows, was officially severed, its lifeline cut, its members scattered and warned. She could continue to live her quiet retirement, her anonymity protected by Thorne's intervention, a Yadwam's fragile shield, but she could never again respond to calls for help from units who fell through the cracks of official channels. The choice had been made. The consequences accepted. The ultimate sacrifice. "I understand, Colonel," Anya said, her voice quiet but firm, her gaze meeting his without flinching. "Do you?" Thorne pressed, his voice sharp, a final test of her resolve, a last chance to confirm her commitment. "Because I need to be certain that you understand the grave consequences of any future unauthorized activities. This is not a game, Sharma. This is a career-ending, life-altering, potentially freedom-ending threat." Anya met his gaze directly, her eyes holding a depth that few could fathom, a quiet strength that had seen her through 2 decades of impossible situations, through fire and shadow. "I understand that some promises can only be kept once, Colonel. I understand that some prices can only be paid once, in full. And I understand that some sacrifices are worth making, even if you can only make them once, even if they mean walking away from everything you've ever known, from the very core of who you are." Thorne nodded slowly, a single, decisive movement, a flicker of something akin to respect in his eyes, a shared burden acknowledged. "Then we understand each other. This is it, then. The final chapter for Sky Warden. May it rest in peace." Anya finished her coffee, the bitter taste a fitting end, a taste of sacrifice, and stood to leave, the conversation officially concluded. But Thorne's voice stopped her at the tent flap, his voice softer now, devoid of its earlier edge, imbued with a quiet, shared melancholy, a deep-seated understanding. "Anya, For what it's worth, what you did, what you've always done, it matters. The F-16s you saved, the pilots you've protected, the missions you've ensured, they matter, regardless of what any investigation or regulation says. The legacy of Sky Warden will live on, even if only in the memories of those you served. Those who will never forget. Anya turned back to face him one last time, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips, a look of profound understanding passing between them, a silent pact. Thank you, Colonel. That means more than you know, far more than any medal or commendation. As she walked out of the command post and into the desert heat, the late afternoon sun casting long, weary shadows, Anya felt the weight of 20 years of service settling on her shoulders like a familiar, comforting burden, now tinged with the quiet ache of profound closure. Sky Warden was truly finished now. Its promises kept and its debts paid, its veterans scattered to the winds of official retirement and civilian obscurity, their names erased from the public record, their heroic deeds confined to hushed whispers among those who knew. But the oath she'd taken 20 years ago to support and defend, to protect those who served, remained intact, an unyielding core of her being, a guiding star in her solitary life. And the knowledge that she'd honored it completely, utterly, and without compromise provided a profound satisfaction that no investigation could diminish, and no regulation could ever take away. Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma had kept every promise that truly mattered. Sometimes, that's all anyone can do. Sometimes, against all odds, that's enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.